Cast your mind back, dear viewers, to the far-off year of 2013, early in the year. The Wii U was already starting to struggle, already feeling a massive drought of games, though some of us still held out hope for the little console with a giant controller. But before the writing was totally on the wall, a January Nintendo Direct gave us a bare-bones teaser for a crossover that no one saw coming. A crossover between Nintendo and Intelligent Systems' Fire Emblem series and Atlus's Shin Megami Tensei series. I was pretty excited as a fan of both series, but all that the announcement did was confirm that the project was in the works and that it was announced far, far earlier than most Nintendo projects usually are. And then silence. The game wasn't mentioned or even hinted at all throughout the rest of the year and 2014, leading most to believe the game had just been cancelled. But in early 2015, the game resurfaced again under a very different title and a much different look, combining the aesthetic of the Persona games with the elements and characteristics of the Fire Emblem series, and using the weird and wacky world of the Japanese entertainment industry as its backdrop. It was now to be known by the name of Tokyo Mirage Sessions #FE. Just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? The game follows the story of Itsuki Aoi, a young high schooler who gets pulled into the world of Japanese idol work alongside his classmate and friend Tsubasa Oribe. Tsubasa's wish to become a pop idol stems from a longing to find her sister who disappeared several years ago. The two are drafted as potential talents by Fortuna Entertainment, run by former idol Maiko Shimazaki, who, when she's not boozing it up, also acts as a guide for our young friends. Things take a turn for the strange, however, as Itsuki and Tsubasa are dragged into the world of mirages, beings that hunger for the innate talent and energies that humanity releases, known as performa. As it turns out, Fortuna Entertainment, while a legit business in the entertainment space, was actually established by Maiko to handle Mirage-related incidents on the sly, assisted by the Mirage Tiki, who masquerades as an Utaloid in the real world, this world's version of a Vocaloid, and Barry, a former rock star, current trainer, and full-time magical girl otaku. Quite by accident, Tsubasa and Itsuki end up in the Mirage world, where they end up making pacts with Mirages of their own, with Itsuki gaining an ally in Chrom, while Tsubasa ends up teaming up with Seda, the Pegasus Knight. This fateful meeting actually leads them to discover Tsubasa's missing sister, who had been abducted by a Mirage years ago. And so, the two of them decide that they can't let these Mirages continue to attack other people. And as more and more Mirages seem to be invading the world and stealing away those with powerful performa, Itsuki and his friends need to unravel the mystery behind these beings and figure out how to stop whatever's causing them to go berserk. That's the most pressing matter, of course. When you're not delving into twisted dungeons designed to mimic or parody some form of the entertainment industry, you're also living a double life as an idol in the real world, helping your friends get over their insecurities in things like singing, acting, and modeling, most of which is directly related to whatever is happening in the dungeon of the episode. For example, one episode has Tsubasa being a model for a rather passionate photographer who just happens to be taken over by a Mirage, and because Tsubasa is camera shy, there comes a point in the dungeon where you can't progress until you help Tsubasa overcome her insecurities about being on camera out in the real world. The game's structure, and every individual story of each episode, basically follows the same formula. Tsubasa and Itsuki, or occasionally one of your other partners, will get drafted into a job for Fortuna, oftentimes in a new part of the entertainment industry they haven't worked in before. The person they're working for turns out to be possessed by an evil Mirage, they cause some big problem in whatever part of the map you're in, opening up an idolosphere, or one of the dungeons you go into. You fight your way through a dungeon, you reach the halfway point, but something is keeping you from progressing. So you have to go back out to the real world and find a way to fix what's not working. You go back in, reignite that person's passion so that they break free of the Mirage's control, beat up the Mirage, and get a little piece of the overarching puzzle or a new ally. The game's story is entertaining moment to moment, but it is very, very predictable, as are the personalities of all the characters you'll meet. They all have their own histories, their own wants, and their own insecurities to overcome. Toma, for example, wants to become a main actor in a Sentai show, but has to start working from the bottom up as a grunt and one of the monsters of the week. This feeds well into the side stories, where, when you reach certain points in the plot, or have built up a character's stage rank enough, you can engage in a side story chapter for a particular character. which are basically full-fledged plots on their own, and even non-playable supporting characters, namely Maiko, Tiki, and Barry, all have their own side missions to complete. While the stories themselves are pretty by the numbers, they are fun to watch play out, and you do get rewarded very handsomely for doing them, with powerful new abilities that you can use in combat, or benefits from the non-playable characters. Think the social link system from the Persona series, but without having to really stress about having to stay on top of all of them as they become available. I do wish the characters were a bit more compelling, but they serve their purpose as well, and none of them are boring, that's for sure. They work well within the tropes and roles they're meant to play, and it's fun to watch them interact with one another. For those who have played the Persona games, you might feel right at home with the game's aesthetic, but this game is easier and much more straightforward than most games in the Persona series are. There's no having to worry about social links, as I've noted, no clock to keep your eye on, and you can take your time and pretty much do whatever you want within the confines of any area you've already been to. Not that there's a whole lot to do there. Apart from the events to progress the main or side stories, you can find people who want you to do subquests for them, but unlike the side stories, the subquests are all pretty much busy work and fetch quests that really don't get you a whole lot of useful rewards. It's a bit of a shame because you really don't get a whole lot of reason beyond the plot to visit these different areas unless you have to go into a dungeon in that area for a sub or side quest. Apart from that, you're going to be spending most of your time in Shibuya, which does look nice, I will admit, and compared to the photography and videos I've seen of the Crossroads area they use in the game, it's pretty close. A very nice recreation of the area. Shibuya not only has several dungeon entrances, but is also where most of the primary shops and story progression scenes take place as well. So you'll be coming back there a lot. The only other big city area in the game is Harajuku, and you really don't go there often for plot reasons. While it does have its own shops, there's nothing there that you can't get in Shibuya. Most of the other areas outside of the dungeons are relegated to a single small room that usually only has a small handful of people to talk to. Of course, it's the dungeons that really shine in these areas, and each has a particular gimmick to them which not only reflects the main mirage of that dungeon, but more often than not, the area in the real world where it was formed. For example, you're entering a dungeon from a television studio in the real world. The inside at first seems to be a traditional Japanese castle, but as you progress forward, it becomes clear that it's actually a giant television studio, and you're stuck playing a gopher for the agitated directors and actors spread throughout. In another, featuring the aforementioned photographer, you have to navigate the dungeon in a very roundabout way to avoid stepping into sight of any of these giant cameras, or you'll be sent back to a specific spawn point in the area. These gimmicks are interesting at first, but a few of them, especially the first Shibuya dungeon, which you have to visit twice in the game, which features having to navigate through these giant maid outfits by changing where their sleeve holes are located, so that you can travel between 3 different floors and 2 halves of different rooms in the hopes of finding your way through. It's annoying. What's not so annoying is the combat, which is actually pretty fun. At first, just looking at it, it does remind me a lot of a typical Shin Megami Tensei setup, where you have 3 characters fighting a larger group of enemies, but it incorporates a lot of the elements from the Fire Emblem games. For a start, every character has a class, reflected by the Mirage that they have a pact with. Itsuki is a lord because he's bonded with Chrom, Kiria is a mage because she has Tharja, Draug makes Mamoru into a general, and so forth. Every character's weapon is determined by their class, and if you played any Fire Emblem games, you're probably familiar with the weapons triangle, where certain weapons have an innate advantage over another. Swords beat axes, axes beat spears, spears beat swords. Hitting enemies with the weapons they're weak against will not only cause extra damage, but will also start up a chain attack if other characters have skills that link attacks together. Every character also has elemental weaknesses and innate affinities for certain elemental and physical attacks as well, which can lead to similar effects, and some units are just plain weak to specific attacks. Most flying enemies, for example, will get destroyed by archers. You can also swap characters in and out without sacrificing their attack phase, so you're encouraged to change up your team to fit the current situation. Every character can also learn new skills depending on the weapons they have equipped, and you will gain more skill slots as you progress through the game. But initially, the amount of skills you can hold is rather limited, giving you a bit of a Pokemon situation where you have to determine what skills you're willing to keep and which you want to get rid of. It gets even tougher down the road when you have the ability to reforge your old weapons to make them more powerful and upgrade older versions of the skills you've learned before. And that's just for attack skills. You've also got passive skills to consider, and the ever-important chain skills as well, which are all counted as separate categories. You can also class change at a certain point in the game as well, and each character has 2 different upgraded classes to choose from. Usually a light and dark variation, but don't worry, dark isn't evil in this case. Depending on your choice, the biggest differences are what stat bonuses or penalties you'll take, and a small selection of weapons, only like 1 or 2, might be locked out to you. The game is also pretty well paced, which is something I can't always say for an Atlus RPG. As much as I love the SMT series, more often than not, the forward momentum in those games can be stopped dead by something as innocuous as not having the right sort of skill to exploit a boss's weakness or defend against their own attack. This game though, because of the way it's balanced, you'll always be guaranteed to have at least one character capable of exploiting an enemy's weakness and getting a damage chain going. And those damage chains become much more important as the game goes on. And with the ability to forge and reforge weapons so long as you have the proper performa, gained by defeating regular enemies, you are also always guaranteed to have a good array of powerful skills at your disposal. And with the length of these dungeons, and the ability to get a quick attack in on enemies before the fight begins, you'll almost never have to go grinding for anything. The game just flows well, with my biggest criticism of its pacing being that many of the side stories require a lot of backtracking, some of them into very low-level areas. While you can just avoid fights by not running into the specters that are chasing you throughout the dungeons, sometimes the amount of enemies swarming around you and the occasional savage enemy encounter make it difficult to avoid everything. Graphically, the game looks okay. It has a nice, bright look to it in the overworld, with all of the innocuous crowd people just being neon silhouettes, while the dungeons have the weird Persona vibe to them, with darker but still varied colors, and trippy visuals that, as I pointed out, mimic either their location in the real world or the person controlling the dungeon. However, animations are very simple and stilted, and the character expressions, while they look passable, sort of look awkward at times. This is especially evident in the first-person views, where you're facing one of your party members head-on, and can take in a lot of detail on them. Enemies have a lot more life and vibrance to them, both in their designs and animations, and the playable characters do look a lot more interesting when fused with their mirages in combat, though in true anime style, many of them look downright ridiculous when you think about it. Seriously, Kiria, put some goddamn clothes on. And seriously, Yashiro, you look like you're getting ready to go to a bondage party right now. Actually, anime might be a great way to describe the game and its writing overall, as it derives a lot of its dramatic moments from talking about things in the entertainment industry as though it was a life-or-death situation. Granted, in this case it kind of is, but the delivery just reminds me so much of a series like Yatatake Japan or Food Wars, in how they take something as low stakes as food, or in the case of the game, modeling, acting, or photography, and make it feel as dramatic and tense as possible. Of course, the main difference is both of those shows use their absurd premise and overly dramatic prose as a means of delivering comedy. Tokyo Mirage Sessions, by contrast, is taking itself 100% seriously, which leads to either unintentional comedy or a lot of eye-rolling when one of the characters halts the action to make some big speech about a certain entertainment subject that they're passionate about. High tolerance for purple prose and a total lack of subtlety is required here. I will say that the animated cutscenes, as rare as they are, do look very nice and have some very nice choreography. They serve their purpose well, being mostly glorified music videos, and while they grind the game to a halt, they are nice to look at the very least. And while the game's graphics can be very middling at times, I do find the cutscenes where the characters are engaging in their various shows and crafts to be pretty charming. Musically, the game is great, with a nice mix of the more orchestral scores you would expect from a Fire Emblem game, including a truly wonderful vocal mix of the main theme near the end of the game, with the more heavy trance and metal tracks that you'd expect from a darker Atlus RPG mixed in, mostly in the various dungeons and battle themes. And of course, since the game is so focused on the Japanese entertainment industry, there's also plenty of J-pop and J-rock mixed in as well. Hell, there are even points where, when approaching the certain shops or areas in the overworld in Shibuya, you can hear some stores or events blasting songs from earlier in the game. I'm not really one to judge the nuances of Japanese voice acting since I don't speak the language, but it matches up pretty well with the tone of the writing. Again, the best way that I can think of to describe it is, it's very anime. I might not understand the language, but when you watch enough subbed anime, you tend to get a good idea of how certain scenes are going to be acted out, and the over-the-top and bombastic reactions to the situations that the characters find themselves in are entertaining, but a bit expected. I do like how dynamic a few of them are as well, too. The male cast, for most of the adventure, are pretty consistent all throughout, but the female characters show off a much greater range. For example, Kiria starts off as a bit of a defrosting ice queen, one of the more experienced fighters in the team, but throughout her side story you see a much softer, more bubbly side of her, which is totally different from the front she puts on in most of the main story. You could say that's pretty much the point. I mean, she is an actor after all, among other things, but I appreciate seeing different sides of characters like this. Also, Tsubasa is an adorable dork and I kind of love her. The Wii U was sort of on the same level as the Nintendo 64 when it came to RPGs. There weren't a whole lot of them, and in terms of the ratio of good to bad ones on the system, it's about the same as the old cartridge machine. I'm pleased to say that Tokyo Mirage Sessions #FE is on the good side of the scale, but it's unfortunately also on a bit of the niche side, like most of Atlus's RPGs. If you've played a Shin Megami Tensei or Persona game before, you're going to feel pretty at home with the flow of this game, and if you're a fan of the Fire Emblem series, there's enough fan service here to keep you satisfied, and it gives you a good foundation for how best to utilize the battle mechanics. Though again, I find it very annoying that Nintendo doesn't seem to want to acknowledge that there are other games in the Fire Emblem series beyond Awakening and Shadow Dragon. I mean, Echoes just came out, and you couldn't even bother to put one character from that game in Fire Emblem Warriors, guys? Jeez. But I digress. The game is a lot of fun, and I'd say among the sparse RPGs on the system, it's one of the best, though your tolerance of the Japanese anime tropes might affect your own enjoyment, at least in terms of the story. But it has a fun battle system, rather strategic use of the skills system, and generous difficulty curve, not so difficult that grinding is mandatory, but not so easy that you can just breeze through it without thinking, makes it a game that I think anyone who enjoys RPGs should at least give a shot. Not to mention that there aren't a lot of games where you get to see a girl wearing a bunny-eared suit of armor casting ice magic on her axe to hack her enemies to pieces. See you next time, everybody.